Doctor couldn't believe her eyes when she saw a homeless man, identical to her father, who left on a trip and never returned. Dr. Emily Thompson felt her stomach churn every time she passed that corner on Broadway in downtown New York City. Her shift at Memorial Hospital had been exhausting, and all she wanted was to get home and forget about other people's problems for a few hours. That's when her eyes locked onto the man sitting on the dirty sidewalk, leaning against the wall of an abandoned building. Her heart simply stopped. The graying beard, the deep brown eyes, even the way he held his hands. It was impossible. But there he was, right in front of her. "Dad?" she whispered, unable to move her feet. The man looked up from the cardboard plate where he was eating scraps someone had given him. His confused eyes met hers, but there was no recognition, just the emptiness of someone who didn't understand. "Sorry, miss, I think you've got me mixed up with someone else," he said in a hoarse voice that made Emily tremble from head to toe. It was the voice of Richard Thompson, her father, who had left on a business trip to Alaska 15 years ago and never came back. The family had moved heaven and earth to find him, involving authorities, hiring private detectives, but it was as if he had simply vanished from the face of the earth. Emily approached slowly, removing her white coat and crouching in front of him. The strong smell of sweat and filth hit her, but she didn't care. She studied every detail of that face, weathered by time and suffering. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. John Smith, at least that's what everyone calls me around here," he replied, stirring the food with trembling hands. "How long have you been living on the streets, John?" He stopped eating and looked at her curiously, as if no one had ever asked him that before. "I'm not sure, miss. The days blur together when you've got nowhere to sleep. Maybe 10 years, maybe more." Time stood still. Emily felt her legs go weak. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her gallery, searching among hundreds of photos until she found an old picture of her father, taken just days before his trip. She held the phone up to the man's face, comparing. The resemblance was uncanny. Even the small scar on his chin from a childhood bike accident was there. "John, do you remember anything about your life before the streets?" Emily pressed. He shook his head slowly, as if digging for lost memories. "Sometimes I have strange dreams. A big house, a woman with black hair. But when I wake up, it's all gone. The doctors at the clinic said I've got something wrong with my head." Emily felt the world spin. Her mother, Catherine, had black hair. The house she grew up in was big, with a backyard garden where her father planted roses for his wife. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She stayed up until dawn researching amnesia, head trauma, cases of people who had simply forgotten who they were. By sunrise, she had made a decision. The next day, she returned to the same spot, this time carrying a warm meal and a bottle of water. John was exactly where she'd left him, as if he hadn't moved. "I brought you some food," she said, sitting beside him on the dirty sidewalk. "Why are you doing this, miss? You don't know me." "Maybe I do. I'm just not sure yet." Emily began visiting him every day after her shifts. She learned he frequented a night shelter near downtown where he could shower and get a bed to sleep in, when there was space. During their conversations, she carefully tried to spark some memory by mentioning details of Richard Thompson's life. "John, do you like plants?" she asked one afternoon. His eyes lit up for a moment as if a distant light had flickered on. "I think so. Sometimes I find myself staring at the trees in the square and feel something good inside," he said, touching his chest. Richard had always been passionate about gardening. He spent Sunday mornings tending to plants, teaching Emily about each species. "And the name Catherine, does it mean anything to you?" John stopped eating and grew very still. His hands began to tremble slightly. "Catherine," he repeated slowly. "That name makes me sad. I don't know why." Emily felt her heart race. There was something there, a connection even he didn't understand. At the shelter, an elderly volunteer named Mrs. Jenkins recognized Richard's photo when Emily showed it to her. The woman, with white hair and kind eyes, had worked there for over 20 years. "This man showed up here about 12 years ago," she said, adjusting her glasses to see the photo better. "He was in terrible shape, no identification, injured, and couldn't remember a thing. We tried to find his family, but he didn't even know his own name. Did he ever recover his memory? Only fragments. Sometimes he'd talk in his sleep, mention a daughter, a house with a garden, but he could never piece it together." Emily left the shelter with more questions than answers. That night she went to her mother's house in the Upper East Side, an elegant townhouse where she'd grown up. Catherine was in the living room, watching her evening soap opera, when her daughter walked in unannounced. "Emily, you scared me," said the 67-year-old woman, still beautiful despite the grey strands she insisted on dyeing. "Mom, we need to talk." Catherine noticed the seriousness in her daughter's tone and turned off the TV. Emily sat in the armchair where her father used to read the newspaper and took a deep breath. "I found a man on the streets who looks exactly like Dad." Catherine's face instantly paled. "Emily, don't start with these fantasies again. Your father's been gone for 15 years. You need to accept that." "Mom, I'm a doctor. I know how to recognize physical similarities. This man isn't just like Dad. He is Dad." "That's impossible," Catherine shouted, standing up from the chair. "Your father had an accident in the forest. His body was never found, but he's gone, Emily. Gone. How can you be so sure? You've never really told me what happened on that trip." Catherine looked away, as she always did when the subject was her husband's disappearance. Emily noticed the movement and pressed on. "Mom, I'm serious. I'm going to do a DNA test. If I'm wrong, you'll never hear about this again." "And if you're right?" Catherine asked, her voice barely audible. "Then we'll bring Dad home." The conversation ended badly, with Catherine locking herself in her room and Emily returning to her apartment more confused than ever. Something about her mother's behavior wasn't right. There was fear in her eyes, but also guilt. The next morning, Emily convinced John to go with her to the hospital for some tests. She told him it was a routine checkup, part of a social program she was developing. He agreed, trusting the kindness she'd shown him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. In the lab, Emily collected the material for the DNA test, explaining to John it was just a general health screening. While waiting for the results, which would take a few days, she decided to dig deeper. She searched through hospital records for unidentified patients admitted around 12 or 15 years ago. It was painstaking work, sifting through hundreds of old files. When she finally found what she was looking for, the ground seemed to open beneath her feet. There was a record of a man around 50 years old, found unconscious near the Port Authority bus terminal, with head injuries and signs of violence. No documents, no memory, no family looking for him. He had been hospitalized for 3 weeks before being transferred to a rehabilitation center. Emily rushed to the rehabilitation center with the medical records in hand. The director, a middle-aged woman named Barbara, vaguely remembered the case. "He was a very sad patient," she reported. "He stayed here for 2 months. When he was medically cleared, he had nowhere to go. That's when the social worker found him a spot at the shelter." "Did he ever say anything about his past?" "Sometimes he mumbled things about flowers, about a daughter studying medicine. We thought they were post-traumatic delusions." Emily's heart raced. She had been studying medicine exactly when her father disappeared. He had always been so proud of her choice, telling everyone his daughter would be a doctor. Over the following days, while waiting for the DNA results, Emily intensified her visits to John. She took him to get a haircut and shave at a barbershop near the hospital. When the man looked at himself in the mirror, she saw a strange expression cross his face. "There's something familiar about this face," he murmured. "Like I've seen myself like this before." Emily bought him new clothes and took him for more detailed medical exams. During one of the tests, she discovered something that took her breath away: an old, faded tattoo on John's right arm. It was the initials E.T. inside a small heart. Emily Thompson. Her father had gotten that tattoo when she turned 5, as a way to show his love for his only daughter. "John, do you remember getting this tattoo?" she asked, trying to control her emotions. He looked at his own arm as if seeing the mark for the first time. "I don't remember, but sometimes I feel a good pain when I look at it, like it's important." That night, Emily invited her mother over for dinner at her apartment. Catherine arrived nervous, suspicious of the sudden invitation. "The DNA results come out tomorrow," Emily said, pouring the wine. "Emily, please don't do this to yourself, or to me." "Mom, why are you so afraid? If it's not Dad, the test will prove it. What's the problem?" Catherine drank the wine in one go and poured herself another. Her hands trembled. "Because if it's him, if it really is Richard," she began but stopped mid-sentence. "What, Mom? Finish the thought. If it's him, I'll have to explain why I didn't look for him properly. Why I stopped looking." Emily sat beside her mother, holding her cold hands. "Mom, tell me the truth. What happened on that trip?" Catherine closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to reveal a decades-old secret. "We had a terrible fight before he left. Really bad. He found out something I'd been hiding for years." "What did he find out?" "That before I met him, I had a son, and I gave the child up for adoption." Emily fell silent, processing the information. She had a brother she never knew existed. "Your father felt betrayed. He said our marriage was built on lies. He left for Alaska saying that when he came back we'd have a serious talk about our future. And you never told me? How could I? You were a child. And after he disappeared, I thought it was best to leave the past buried." "Mom, do you have any idea what you've done? If that man really is Dad, he spent 15 years on the streets because of a fight." "I didn't know," Catherine cried. "When he didn't come back, I thought he had abandoned me. That he'd chosen to start a new life far away from me and the lies." Emily spent the night wide awake, trying to process everything she had discovered. In the morning, she went straight to the lab to get the DNA test results. Dr. Wilson, the pathologist in charge, greeted her with a serious expression. "Emily, the results are here, but before you open it, I have to ask, are you prepared for any answer?" "I am." He handed her the sealed envelope. Emily opened it with trembling hands and read the result twice before fully processing it. A 99.7% match. John Smith was indeed Richard Thompson, her father. Emily left the lab in a daze. She drove to the spot where she usually met John, but he wasn't there. She asked other homeless people in the area and learned he had spent the night at the shelter. At the shelter, Mrs. Jenkins told her John had left early, saying he was going for a walk around the city. Emily searched for hours until she finally found him sitting on a bench in Union Square, watching the pigeons. "John?" she called, approaching slowly. "Oh, it's you, Doctor. I was thinking about some strange things." "What kind of things?" "I dreamed about a little girl last night. She called me Daddy and showed me a drawing she made at school. It felt so real that I cried when I woke up." Emily sat beside him on the bench. The moment of truth had come. "John, I need to tell you something very important. My name isn't Emily Smith, it's Emily Thompson. And you're not John Smith." He looked at her confused as if he didn't understand. "You're Richard Thompson, my father." The reaction was immediate. John jerked up from the bench, shaking his head violently. No, that's not true. I'm John. I've always been John." "Dad, I have the DNA test results. You're my father. 15 years ago, you left on a trip, and something happened. You had an accident, lost your memory, but now you're here." "You're lying," he shouted, pacing in circles. "Why are you doing this to me?" Emily showed him the old photo of them together, her as a child and him smiling beside his wife. She also showed him the comparison she had made between his face and the photo. "Look closely, Dad. Don't you see the resemblance?" John stared at the pictures with tears in his eyes. For a moment, Emily saw a flicker of recognition, but then confusion returned. I can't be that person. That person had a life, a family. I have nothing." "You do. You have me. And we have Mom too." At the mention of Catherine, John had a visceral reaction. He clutched his head as if in intense pain. "Catherine, that name hurts me. Why does that name hurt so much? because you two argued before you left. But it can be fixed, Dad. We can be a family again." John ran from the square, leaving Emily alone on the bench. She followed, but he was faster, disappearing into the downtown streets. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now continuing. Emily spent the next 3 days searching for her father. She visited all his usual spots, talked to other homeless people, but no one had seen him. Then a child selling candy at a traffic light said they'd seen a white-bearded man hiding in an abandoned factory on the east side. Emily drove to the location. It was an old textile factory that had closed decades ago. The gate was broken, allowing access to the overgrown inner courtyard. She entered slowly, calling for her father. "Dad? Richard? I know you're here." She found him at the back of the main warehouse, sitting on the floor among old rusted machines. He stared fixedly at one of the machines, as if it brought back some memory. "I worked here," he said, without looking at Emily. "When I was young, before I got married, I remembered that last night." Emily moved closer and sat beside him on the dirty floor. "Are you remembering anything else?" "Fragments, like pieces of cut glass, a beautiful woman with black hair, a house with a garden. And you? I remember you as a little girl asking me to read bedtime stories." Emily felt tears streaming down her face. "I loved when you read to me. You always did different voices for each character." Richard finally looked at her, and for the first time his eyes held true recognition. "Emily? My little Emily?" "It's me, Dad. It's me." They embraced there in the middle of the abandoned factory, among the machines that had witnessed the beginning of Richard's adult life. It was as if 15 years of separation had been condensed into a single moment. "What happened to me?" he asked, still confused. "Why can't I remember properly?" "We'll figure it out together. But first, we need to take you home. And your mother. And will she want to see me?" Emily hesitated before answering. "Dad, Mom thought you had abandoned her. She didn't know you were lost without your memory. It'll be hard for her too." That afternoon, Emily took Richard to her apartment. She gave him a bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal. While he rested, she called her mother. "Mom, you need to come here, now." "Emily, I'm not in any condition to..." The test came back positive. "It's Dad, and he's starting to remember." The silence on the other end of the line lasted nearly a minute. He remembers me. He remembers your name, and he remembers you two fought. Mom, you need to come here and explain everything to him." Catherine arrived 2 hours later, visibly nervous. When she saw Richard sitting on the living room sofa, she lost all composure and began sobbing uncontrollably. "Richard. My God, Richard." He looked at her with a mix of recognition and confusion. "Catherine, I remember being angry with you. Angry. But I don't remember why. Because I lied. I lied about having a child before I met you, and you felt betrayed." "A child," Emily interjected. "Dad, you have another son, a half-brother of mine who was given up for adoption." Richard fell silent for a few minutes, processing the information. "And because of that, I left. You said that when you got back from your trip, we'd make a decision about our marriage," Catherine explained, stepping closer slowly. "I thought you had decided to leave me. But I never came back from the trip. What happened to me on that trip?" No one had an answer to that question. Emily decided it was time to investigate further. In the following days, she contacted the company that had sent Richard to Alaska 15 years earlier. The company still existed, but under new management. She obtained the travel records and discovered that Richard was supposed to stay in Anchorage for just 1 week, negotiating the purchase of wood for furniture. He had stayed at a hotel downtown and, according to the records, had checked out normally. Emily decided to travel to Anchorage with Richard, hoping that revisiting the place might trigger some memories. Catherine wanted to join them, but Richard still wasn't comfortable with her presence. In Anchorage, Emily and Richard stayed at the same hotel where he had been 15 years earlier. The current manager hadn't been there at the time, but an older housekeeper vaguely remembered a man who had been mugged near the Central Market. It happened a lot back then, she said. Unwary tourists going out alone at night. Some came back with just the clothes on their backs. Emily and Richard went to the Central Market. It was a colorful, bustling place, full of vendors selling regional fruits and handmade crafts. Richard walked past the stalls as if following a mental script. "I came here to buy something for you," he suddenly said. "A gift." "What kind of gift?" "A doll. A wooden doll made by a craftswoman here. I wanted to give it to you when I came back." Emily felt a tightness in her chest. She had mentioned to her father before the trip that she wanted a different kind of doll, not the mass-produced ones all her friends had. They found the craftswoman's stall, still in the same spot. The woman, now in her 70s, remembered Richard. "Of course I remember. He bought a beautiful doll for his daughter, but then he came back all bruised, saying he'd been robbed. He was very confused, talking nonsense." "What happened to him after that?" "I helped him get to the hospital. He had head injuries and didn't seem to know where he was. That was the last time I saw him." At the hospital in Anchorage, Emily accessed the old records. Richard had been admitted as an unidentified patient with a head trauma. He was hospitalized for 2 weeks, but one day he simply disappeared. "Many patients without family end up wandering off," explained the on-duty doctor who assisted them. "They get confused, disoriented, and go searching for something familiar." Emily and Richard returned to New York City with more pieces of the puzzle. It was likely he had tried to go home after leaving the hospital, but his mental confusion led him in the wrong directions. He had wandered for years before reaching New York City. Back in the city, Emily arranged a meeting with a neurologist specializing in head trauma. Dr. Harrison examined Richard thoroughly and explained that severe trauma could cause retrograde amnesia. "What's interesting is that some memories are returning naturally," the doctor observed. "That means the brain tissue is healing. With the right stimulation, he may recover much of his memory." Emily began a memory stimulation process with Richard. She showed him old photos, took him to meaningful places, and played music he used to listen to. Gradually, more memories surfaced. He remembered the house they lived in, the garden he tended with such care, the Sunday mornings when he made pancakes for the family. He also remembered the fight with Catherine, the feeling of betrayal, and his decision to travel to clear his head. "I didn't want to end the marriage," he said one afternoon. "I just needed time to process everything. I was going to come back, and we'd talk like adults." Emily thought it was time to bring her parents together again. This time the conversation was calmer. Catherine apologized for the lies and explained she had hidden their son out of fear of being judged. "I was very young, Richard. My parents forced me to give the baby up for adoption. When I met you, I wanted to start a new life without the weight of the past." "And where is he now? Our other son?" Emily had located her half-brother through adoption records. His name was Michael Robert. He was 42 and worked as a teacher in Hartford. He was married with 2 children. "I've already spoken to him on the phone," Emily said. "He knows the story and wants to meet you." The first meeting between Richard and Michael was emotional. Despite the years apart, there was an instant connection between father and son. Michael had the same brown eyes as Richard and the same way of gesturing when he spoke. "I always knew I was adopted," Michael shared. "My adoptive parents were wonderful, but I've always been curious about my biological family." "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you," Richard said, moved. "You didn't know I existed, and from the story Emily told me, you've been through a lot of pain too." In the following months, the family slowly reunited. Richard initially stayed in Emily's apartment, but gradually spent more time in the house he had shared with Catherine. The memories kept coming back, some painful, others full of joy. He remembered the day Emily was born, the emotion of holding her for the first time. He recalled the sleepless nights when she was sick, the birthday celebrations, the pride he felt when she got good grades in school. "I never completely forgot you," he told his daughter. "Even when I didn't know who I was, there was always an ache in my chest whenever I saw fathers with their daughters on the street." Richard also began volunteering at the shelter where he had spent so many years. His unique experience made him an important bridge between the homeless and the professionals trying to help them. "Many people on the streets are lost like I was," he explained. Sometimes they just need someone who understands the confusion they feel. Emily reduced her hours at the hospital to spend more time with her father, helping in his recovery. They resumed their Sunday ritual of tending to the garden, and Richard taught her secrets about plants he had forgotten during his years on the streets. "Plants are like memories," he mused while pruning the roses. Even when they seem lost, there are always roots that can sprout again. Catherine faced her own demons during this process. She sought therapy to deal with the guilt of hiding the truth about Michael and for not searching more insistently for Richard when he disappeared. "I thought it was easier to accept that you had abandoned me than to admit you might be in danger," she confessed to her husband. "Maybe that was the only way you could move forward," Richard replied. "We all did what we thought was right at the time." Michael became a constant presence in the family, bringing his wife and children to Sunday lunches. The kids were fascinated by the grandfather who had been lost for so long and saw his story as a grand adventure. Richard, in turn, devoted himself to being the grandfather he never got to be. He taught his grandchildren about plants, told them stories from his time on the streets, and shared lessons about resilience and forgiveness. "Grandpa Richard went through a lot of hard things," Michael explained to his children, "but he never gave up on living." A year after their reunion, the family organized a special party. It was Richard's 68th birthday, the first he celebrated fully aware of his identity in 15 years. Relatives, old friends who had lost touch with the family, and even some companions from his time on the streets, whom Richard had helped at the shelter, gathered for the occasion. "I lost 15 years of my life," Richard said in a brief speech, "but I gained a perspective I never would have had otherwise. I learned that family isn't just blood, it's a choice, and I choose all of you, every day." Emily looked around the room, seeing her father surrounded by people who loved him, and felt deep gratitude. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought back not just a lost father, but a stronger, closer family. During the party, Richard approached his daughter and handed her a small wrapped gift. "What's this, Dad? Open it and see." Inside the paper was a small wooden doll, hand-carved with delicate details. It was exactly like the one he had bought for her in Anchorage 15 years earlier. "I went back there last week and asked the artisan to make another just like it," he explained. "I promised I'd bring you a gift when I came back from the trip. It took a while, but I'm keeping my promise." Emily hugged her father with tears in her eyes, clutching the doll as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. It wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of a love that had endured time, distance, and forgetting. 2 years after the reunion, Richard had recovered about 80% of his memories. Some gaps remained, especially from the early years on the streets, but he had learned to live with it. "Maybe it's better not to remember everything," he would say. "Some pains are best left in the past." Emily married a fellow doctor, and Richard had the honor of walking her down the aisle. During the ceremony, he held his daughter's hand and whispered, "Thank you for never giving up on me." "I would never give up on my father," she replied. On their honeymoon, Emily and her husband visited Anchorage, and she made sure to stop by the Central Market to thank the artisan who had helped Richard so many years before. "Your daughter grew up to be a beautiful woman," the woman said, admiring the wedding photos, "and your father was very brave never to give up on coming home." Michael also moved to New York City with his family, accepting a job at a school near his parents' home. Richard's grandchildren grew up hearing stories about resilience and unconditional love. "Grandpa Richard taught us that family is the most important thing in the world," the eldest granddaughter wrote in a school essay, "and that we should never give up on the people we love." The shelter where Richard had lived created a special family reintegration program inspired by his story. Volunteers were trained to identify people with possible amnesia and help them rebuild their identities. "How many families are separated without knowing it?" Richard reflected during a talk about his experience. "How many people are lost, waiting for someone who cares enough to look?" Emily continued her work at the hospital, but now with a different perspective on her patients. In every face she saw the possibility of an untold story, a separated family, a love interrupted but not forgotten. "Medicine isn't just about treating bodies," she explained to the students she mentored. It's about reconnecting people with their lives, their identities, with what makes them human. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 years after the reunion, the whole family gathered in the garden. Richard watered the plants while the grandchildren played among the flowers. Catherine prepared lunch in the kitchen. Michael helped Emily organize old photos into albums, and Michael's wife read a book on the porch. "Dad," Emily called, walking over to him, "are you happy?" Richard stopped watering and looked around, taking in every member of his family. "You know, Emily, I spent 15 years lost, not knowing who I was, sleeping on sidewalks and eating scraps. I could be bitter about all that lost time. But I've learned that time isn't lost when we learn about love. And I've learned that a family's love is stronger than any trauma, any distance, any forgetting." He pointed to a rose bush he'd recently planted. "See that plant? It was almost dead when I brought it home. But with care, water, and patience, it bloomed again. We're like that too. It's never too late to start over, to bloom again." Emily hugged her father, breathing in the scent of wet earth and the flowers he tended with such love. It smelled like childhood, like safety, like home. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, my daughter, and this time I'll never forget it." End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this heartwarming story of family reunion. Do you know someone who's been through a similar situation? Share your thoughts and your own experience in the comments. Your participation means so much to us.